we know that there are many different ways to treat, support, and work with this group of children. So we really look forward to hearing more about this shortly. Now we need to keep a rather high tempo today for everything we want to listen to. So we'll keep this introduction short. You can see the agenda here, right? Perfect. So I think you've all seen it already, but after these introductions, we'll hear from Annemiek Harder, who will talk about the Dutch experience of institutional care. And that is then followed by Sander Konings and Peter van Anden, who will talk about schema-based approaches and their work to reduce the use of isolation and force. At the end, Petter Marklund from the National Board will reflect a bit on what we've heard and also share a few insights from his work here in Sweden. So welcome all. I'll hand over to you, Sarah, for a few housekeeping.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Sarah Levenov. I am the head of the R&D department at the National Board, and I have the pleasure to facilitate together with Joel. So before we start, I would like to mention that this will be recorded. You will be given the access afterwards, and also the PowerPoint slides will be sent to you by email. We don't have any time for you to ask questions during the seminar. You can your comments and questions in the question box in below. So, and Joel and I will try to pick. I'm sorry, it's my email. Try to pick up this during the talks, and we won't be able to have time to address them all, so we get back to you afterwards. So with that said, I give the floor to Paul Monton, Secretary General at the World Childhood Foundation, and Elisabeth Aubuchon, Director General at the National Board of Institutional Care. Paula, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Here you're busy. People are begging for attention. We get it now. So my name is Paula Monton. I'm serving as the Secretary General of World Childhood Foundation. We are so glad to be co-hosting this event together with the National Board of Institutional Care. I'm so glad that all of you could join us here today. I've been looking forward, so welcome. Childhood has worked with issues related to institutional care ever since we founded a bit more than 20 years ago. We've mostly done so abroad in Asia, in Eastern Europe, but more and more also here in Sweden. And what we do is support alternatives, including early interventions, family-based options, and also the development of best practice. And we do this because it's part of our work to prevent violence against children. We know that children placed in institutional care suffer high risks of abuse. We know that locked institutions with limited insight can lead to repressive culture and poor outcomes for children. And we know that these children, in many ways, are the most vulnerable in our societies. Caring for children with complex background, including abuse and trauma, is not an easy task. We are well aware of the challenges associated with treatment and support. But there are good examples that we can learn from of how to move away from repression and use of force, how to deal with trauma and provide the best circumstances for recovery, healing, and the chance for a better future, to ensure that we actually live up to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And as I now give the word to Elisabeth Aubuchon from the National Board, I want to first thank you and your team for your openness and collaboration. We are so happy that we can arrange this together with you to deepen our collective knowledge and learning for the benefit of the children we care for and are accountable to. So, Elisabeth.
Thank you very much, Paula. And I'm very, very pleased also that we have had this series of meeting, you and I and our co-workers, to this seminar. And this is a seminar with the purpose of shared learning. I'm also grateful for the board representation here today. We have representative from the NGOs as well as research community. The National Board of Institutional Care is represented of management as well as practitioners and experts. It is my firm belief is that our agency have close cooperation with the civil society as well as the research community. The challenges that we face as a society are complex and we need to work together. Our task is providing care and treatment for children and youth with severe needs, always usually in combination with a history of problems in their communities, families, and schools. These are children where the society often has failed in providing care and treatment and tried different care and treatment that has been available. So it is obvious that this cannot be a single solution how to provide safe and effective care for these children. Instead, we need a broad range of solutions and approaches to be able to fulfill our mission. Our responsibility is also to provide institutions with staff that has the right competence matching this very complex task that we have. So the treatment and care that we offer must be safe, effective, and based on science. There must also be transparency surrounding what we do and why. As an agency, we carry a huge responsibility for the children and the youth that we care for. And therefore, it is important to listen to ideas and from other practitioners and researchers, which is why it gives me great joy to take part of this seminar today. And I'm looking forward to learn from our Dutch colleagues. So thank you, and I hand it over to Joel.
All right, thank you for those words. And with that, I will jump straight into the presentations and the main points of today. I will introduce Ms. Annemiek Harder now, a professor at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam and an expert on institutional care for children. Annemiek has written extensively on issues related to compulsory and secure residential care, and is also active in several European and international networks focused on residential care for children. Areas of particular interest in her research has been how child relationships affects treatment and outcomes for children, the importance of a supportive and caring climate in institutions, and how staff training affects also treatment in those type of environments. So we're very happy to have you here today, Annemiek, welcome, and I'll give the floor to you.
All right, thank you very much, and good to be here in Sweden and to join you with this session. I will share my PowerPoint presentation so you can look with me. So I will try to share some challenges and innovations that we have in the Netherlands, and I think we have quite some comparable challenges as in your country. But of course we have a smaller country than you in Sweden, in the Netherlands. But we do have quite a lot of people in the Netherlands. So I want to first share a bit about the Dutch situation, because there is quite a limited support for secure residential care, which has led to a reduction in the Netherlands. So I'll show you a bit about that, and then I'll go about what works and what does not work in secure residential care. So I've got some messages for you to take home. So we have in the Netherlands, we have like 70 million people, and around 3.8 million are youth. So we have 20%, somewhat more is youth. And about 11% of all youth in the Netherlands are using youth care services. So we have quite some happy youth in the Netherlands, which from a UNICEF report, that we have quite some happy young people, but still about 1/10 of our youth is using youth care services. And a smaller group, about 43,000, is using out-of-home care services. So thinking about residential care, but also foster care. So 10% of young people in youth care is using out-of-home care. And then you end up with residential care, and residential care is a small fraction of all young people in youth care. About 21,000 young people each year are using residential care services in the Netherlands, which is about half of the group who is using home care services. So then you have a bit of an idea. So the group is using residential care services in the Netherlands is quite small. About 5% of young people in care, and of all youth in care is about 0.6%. So we are talking about a small group of young people that is using residential care, which probably is comparable as is in Sweden. I'm not sure, but I'll hear from you probably. And we have some numbers also, which is also difficult in the Netherlands, but we have some numbers about youth care use. So I just print out-of-home care use. And you see here foster care is the biggest part. Then you have residential group care and family-based care, and then we have secure residential care. So secure residential care is really for a very small group of young people, around 1,000, 1,500 young people each year that are using residential care, secure residential care. So even secure residential care is a smaller part of out-of-home care. As you see, it's not very clear from this picture, but you see that residential care, I don't know if you see my pointer, I think you do, from 2007 to you see a slight decline, and the most recent years it has even more down. So you see a reduction in secure residential care placements in the Netherlands, which is a consequence of the youth care policy we have in the Netherlands. So since a couple of years in the Netherlands, we have youth care organizations, or the organization youth care is on municipality level. So we still have 12 provinces, you see on the left. But since 2015, since the new Youth Act, we have the municipalities that are responsible for youth care in the Netherlands. So we have like 380 municipalities. So we have a lot of municipalities that are responsible for youth care, including specialized services such as secure residential care. So it's very difficult. So the organization of youth care has become more difficult than it already was. So that's good to know for you how this Dutch situation is. And these municipalities are responsible for different youth care services. So we have like universal services, prevention, so very low-key services, which are also a priority for the municipality. So think, okay, if we are focusing on prevention, then we can also prevent the use of specialized services, such as residential care. So the idea is to increase preventive and early intervention support and to decrease the number of young people in specialized care. That was the whole idea of the new Youth Act we have since 2015. Residential care is not a priority at all. So you see this figure, prevention is the base, and then you have specialized treatment, so very much focused on that. And then you have family-based out-of-home care, and then you end up with residential care, which is not a priority at all. It's very small. The aim is also to make this as small as possible, to prevent it. And if it's needed, out-of-home care, we say in the Netherlands, okay, it should be as home-like as possible. I'm not sure whether it's a very good translation, but I think you get an idea what I mean by that. So there's a very high priority for foster care or therapeutic family homes as an out-of-home care service. Residential care, well, is not much invested in. We say, okay, we can use foster care, foster families or therapeutic family homes. And here you see an example of such a family foster home in the Netherlands. So just in a normal, well, you heard, in a normal house between other houses, and very family focused. So this idea behind youth care services in the Netherlands, you can say that residential is not a priority, also not to invest in. And there was a report, sort of an action plan for youth care in the Netherlands, which was published in 2018, which also made a very clear statement about this. So I would like to read this to you so you get an idea. In the first place, we develop in such a way that more children can grow up just at home. Yet if children cannot live at home anymore, it's preferred to ensure that they receive home-like or small-scale family-focused care within their own networks as much as possible. The support should be focused on offering perspective. A long-term stay in a religious institution is not good for any child. So, and with this focus on large institution, they also refer to residential care in the Netherlands, which sometimes is still offered in larger scale settings. Then you can think of groups with like 8 to 10 children that are living in a residential group. These small scale facilities, it's often defined as a facility or a group or a home for like 4 to 6 young people. So it's smaller, less young people. I'm curious how that is in your country, in Sweden. Secure residential care, especially that, is very popular. It's the same in your country, I think. So we've seen a decline in secure residential care specifically, also in residential care, but specifically in secure residential care. So these are a bit more current numbers than I showed before. And especially the last year, from 2019 to 2020, you see a huge decline in secure residential care placements. So there are also some facilities that have closed in the last couple of years in the Netherlands. So then you have an idea about what's happening in secure residential care in the Netherlands at the moment. So, and here you have an idea of how these institutions look like. This one does not exist anymore. At least fences have been removed, and I think it's this is where I did my PhD study on secure residential care, actually. And there you get an impression about how the room was there in the secure residential care facility. Where the young people were living. So you see there were 12 young people at this group at that moment. This is not happening anymore, but it was. And here you have another idea how this group looked like from the inside. Well, if you're looking at secure residential care in the Netherlands, it has been reduced in the last couple of years and does not have high priority, also not to invest in it. So the main focus is on how to achieve alternatives or develop other opportunities. And if you have the target group in secure residential care in the Netherlands, you can say the main target group exists of adolescents, like 12 to 18 years old. The mean age of young people is like 14, 15 years old, often externalizing behavior problems. So also delinquency, but that's not the main reason for their placement. So it's a juvenile justice facility, because we also have juvenile justice facility in the Netherlands, which is specifically focused on youth who have committed criminal offenses. but these people are placed there for protection for themselves or protection for their environment. So yeah, that's the idea of a secure residential placement in the Netherlands. They also often show substance use problems, poor motivation for treatment, because yeah, it is a forced placement, and it's also a judge is needed, so a court is needed to be placed there in a secure facility. And what we often see for this target group is that they have quite a large care history, so there are often problems already, and they often have had other types of care, and include home-based care, but it can also include foster care, for example. So it's quite a difficult target group. Probably the same in your country, but I'm not sure. But this is how it is in the Netherlands. So this difficult target group, and also the current circumstances in the Netherlands make it quite problematic to keep a good quality and also an effectiveness of youth care. So we have some issues, which I already mentioned, a couple of them. First one are the budget cuts, because when they did the transformation and this new Youth Act in 2015, also said, okay, if we are going to focus on prevention, then we don't need secure, or we don't need specialized services anymore. So we can also reduce our budgets at the same time. So there are a lot of budget cuts have been done, and this led to a reduction of residential care facilities because there was no money for it anymore. And it makes it all difficult to create room for reflection or professionalization and innovations and improvement. So it's a difficult environment to do that. There are also wait lists for young people. So what you see is that there are secure residential care facilities, but young people who are placed there cannot move. They cannot move further because there are open residential care facilities are closed, for example, or they have diminished. So it's difficult, these waiting lists. And there also is a focus on short-term residential care, with the idea that residential care is actually harmful, so we need to prevent it. So we need to have a short stay as possible, which also led to sometimes instability of residential care placements. And a risk, which is probably also your country and already mentioned, is repression and high suicide rate of youth in secure residential care, which has been the case in the Netherlands. So there are quite some issues that are going on in the Netherlands. So what can we do to make this a bit more effective, or to try to make a better quality of care? That's the main challenge, I think. And what we know from research is that avoid use of repression or counterproductive strategies such as punishment and confrontation can lead to better outcome. If we can prevent repression happening, then we might make some improvements. So in the Netherlands, I don't know if you know this study, but Sophie de Valk finished her PhD study in 2018, and she also showed her study that if you are using repression, this is often ineffective. It even works counterproductive, and it's only effective when the climate is characterized by trust and good treatment relationships between youth and care workers. So, but the professionals often use repression if they are helpless, or to use as a sort of a survival strategy to get control back or to prevent escalating problems. So it has a function, but it's very ineffective and counterproductive, actually. And it can be a result of an intuitive approach, because if you look at research on what are care workers doing in residential care, you see that they often act according to their own personal styles, and they develop their styles also based on trial and error. So they use their intuition and learn by experience from their colleagues. So if you are dealing with externalizing behavior problems, which are often the case for young people in secure residential care, they often intuitively react to that by a controlling approach, like using corrective and restrictive actions. So this also points at the need to pay attention to training in this. But yeah, this repression, this is what happens in that. It can make this an explanation for what happens. And other research also shows that if you are, for example, using writing reflex, this also leads to counterproductive results. If you are working with young people or clients that are not motivated for change, the intuition or the reflex that care workers often have is to use corrective actions to achieve change, to focus on confronting or convincing or to correct the other, to guide them in another way. So I'm not sure if you have know about motivational interviewing, but this is based on motivation, this whole idea. And all care workers actually have like this button or reparation correction button. And if they put up the volume too high, then you're focusing on confronting and directing too much, which leads to the opposite, not an outcome you want. You cannot achieve change like this with young people, and you will achieve the opposite, like resistance and no change in the way you would like to focus. So this writing reflex can be a thing that is a phenomenon that can be happening in secure residential care. And one of my PhD students who was just finished her PhD study in March also looked specifically at this, and we find that care workers quite often use these directing or writing reflex corrective actions during conversations with young people in secure residential care. An example is this one. No, but I also think that it's not wise for you to fight. You have enough things on your mind. So this is a sort of an advice that the care workers give, which is a good intention, but it's not well timed. Then the young person is probably not waiting for it. So it's very important to have a good timing in giving advice to young people. And this directing, these corrective actions happen quite sometime in secure residential care. And what we also know from research is that if you are focusing on deterrence and discipline as a way of punishment or as a way to change behavior, or for example, youth delinquents, because this is a meta-analysis of Lipsy, and he made an overview of all the studies that have been done on reduced recidivism, like delinquent behavior after juvenile treatment. And they saw that deterrence and discipline were intervention philosophies that were counterproductive, leading to more delinquent behavior after it. So like if you try to attempt to frighten young people with deterrence, or if you use discipline like military style boot camps, you achieve the opposite results of what you want, because you have a higher delinquency after this. So we know there are a lot of studies that show that punishment and confrontation are counterproductive strategies, but still they are used with the idea that it's effective. But we know from research that they're not effective, they're even counterproductive. So what Lipsy also showed in his review study, was counseling, multiple services, and skills building, for example, are effective. So in that case, they showed that there was a diminishment, so like a decline in delinquent behavior after having this counseling. So we know what does not work and we know what works. We know that counseling, combination of services like case management and skills building, like social skills training or work-oriented support, are effective in reducing recidivism. And in the end, what we want to do with treatment, secure residential care, is to achieve change. We want to achieve change in their behavior, but also maybe in the context that the young people are growing up in. So we know that avoiding the use of counterproductive strategies, punishment or repression, confrontation, can lead to better outcomes. And we also know that there are other things that can lead to positive outcomes, such as good therapeutic relationship, positive treatment skills, and also training by care workers. That are components that can lead us to better outcomes. So I don't know if you have seen this before, but Wempelt made a review study about psychotherapy for adults. So this is not about youth, but it's focused on adults. But they made a very nice overview of studies focusing on what works in care. And well, this is a figure I'll show what's in. On the left side, you see contextual model factors, and on the right side, specific factors. So these are common factors, like it doesn't matter what type of target group or what type of treatment you have. These are important anyway. It doesn't matter. And specific factors are like specific treatment programs that are specific interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy, multisystemic therapy, these types treatment you should think of. And what he showed in this review is that if you look at what is important, you usually see effect sizes here, and the higher the bars, the higher the effect. And you see here the components, the factors that are mentioned. So I'll take, because it's a lot of information, the top three. What he finds in this review is that consensus, goal consensus or collaboration between therapist and client is the first one, it has the largest effects for outcomes. So if you have a consensus about what you want to achieve, this is a important predictor for positive outcomes. This is also the same for empathy of the therapist and the alliance, like the relationship. And you see the higher the bar, the higher the effect. But also you see also that some bars are broader than the other. So for the alliance, you have a lot of evidence. So the broader the line is, the more evidence there is that the alliance, for example, is important for achieving outcomes. So there are a lot of studies that have been conducted on the alliance, which show that it's a positive, if you have a positive alliance, positive treatment relationship, that you also achieve more positive outcomes. So this is the top three of the factors that are important for outcomes of care. And then you have other three, which are also related to therapists. The fourth one is that you have positive word or affirmation to the client by the therapist. So being positive client. Therapist effect is matters what therapist you have. So the one therapist is not the other. So that matters in what outcomes you can achieve by care, by services. So the congruence or the genuineness of the therapist is important for achieving positive outcomes. So you see that the alliance matters and the therapist matters in achieving positive outcomes in psychotherapy. Okay, so this is adult psychotherapy. And then you have like different studies that have focused on youth care, which is of course relevant for our field also. So there are some meta-analysis or / review studies that have been conducted in the last couple of years, or let's say decennia actually, like 2 decades. And they also that the therapeutic relationship matter, that is a very important factor in treatment for achieving positive outcomes, because you also see here the effect size, and it's between small and medium. So it's not as big as we see in psychotherapy for adults, but it's still there. In all studies, it shows that it's significantly contributing to positive outcomes, this therapeutic relationship. So if you want to learn more about this, you can read all these studies. But it's good to know that this therapeutic relationship is very important for better outcomes. And what matters in that is treatment skills, like treatment skills of professionals in secure residential care matter a lot for what quality of relationship you can achieve. So here is a lot of information, but what I want to show here is that what I did in this study is looking at the youth care worker relationship and the youth teacher relationship. You see this here, and the quality of that in relation to the skills of the care worker or teacher. So young people say for all these skills, like being clear, showing commitment, standing beside the client, being reliable, fitting in the client, being respectful, taking care of good contact, and giving positive feedback. These are all treatment skills that are very important for young people in achieving a positive relationship. So it's very important to have attention to positive treatment skills for achieving this positive relationship. And we know positive relationship is important for positive outcomes. It's very relevant to look at treatment skills of care workers, but also of teachers in secure residential care. But it sounds very nice, and you think, yes, we already know that these relationships are important, but it's not obvious to achieve these in secure residential care because there are mechanisms that play there. For example, you have, as a professional, a different idea about what you want to achieve than a young person. And Susan told that very nice in my PhD study. She said, I will never change the way they want it. So you have a professional, you have a certain standard you want to achieve, and the young person is there lower than you, for example. And then you need to make that switch to the young person, but it doesn't always happen. So you have a consensus about the goals you want to achieve. A second one is, it's clearly easier for a therapist to be warm and caring towards a motivated, closing and cooperative patient than to one who is interpersonally aggressive. So what you also see, if you have difficult young people in secure residential care who might be aggressive and difficult to handle, it is all difficult for you as a care worker to be friendly and nice and warm and caring. So this action-reaction patterns are very important to look at in secure residential care. And you see also in research that there is often a complementarity, that's a very difficult word, but action-reaction patterns in interaction. So if you don't listen to me, I won't listen to you. You see that in secure residential care, and it's a risk, and you should take that into account. So it's very important, if we're talking about secure residential care or residential care more in general, to have focus for, or to have attention for, treatment skills of care workers, and to pay attention to these types of mechanisms in the interactions between two. So what we did, we thought, okay, that's important. I thought, okay, then I should maybe also develop a treatment program that can help care workers in residential care to handle or to have a good contact with young people in residential care. So I conducted with the Annemiek Harder, who I already mentioned before, PhD student, just finished her PhD study, an up-to treatment program for residential care workers based on motivational interviewing and solution-focused therapy to conduct one-on-one conversations with young people during residential care, like coach conversations. They already have these, but we thought, okay, let's make a manual, or let's make a training program for care workers to get ideas and training how they can improve their treatment skills in contact with young persons. So we developed this in collaboration with young people, with care workers, and the aim, of course, is to, in the end, is to achieve change in the behavior of the young person. That was a reason for placement. So important to have a focus on that. So we tried to do this, and I'll just take you with very shortly in the study of wrap up, because time is flying. So what did we do? We used motivational interviewing, and while I was doing my research in secure residential care, I thought, okay, motivation for interviewing is very relevant if talking about the young people in secure residential care because it's focusing on adolescents and focus on autonomy and motivation for change of motivational interviewing is very relevant for this group of young people. It can also improve the alliances, treatment relationships, because it's focusing on treatment skills. It is successful comparable problems like alcohol drug problems, which is often also the case for young people in secure residential care. It can improve long-term outcomes, but in the end, you want to, the changes you achieve in behavior, for example, you would like to keep that also after you, the young people have left secure residential care. So it's very important to focus on evoking the intrinsic motivations for change. You really need to get to know young people and what they find important and what are important values for them to achieve change, because they have to agree and they have the change you are focusing on. They also need to say, okay, yes, it's very important that I don't get into fights all the time because I want to, well, be happy and have a nice life in the end. I don't want to end up in prison as an adult. So they have to see that for themselves, and you can help them with motivational interviewing. So what we did in the study, we developed up to you treatment program, and in Huistra and I also looked at changes in treatment skills of care workers by giving a training in motivational interviewing and looking at actually the conversations they have with young people. So I want to show you an example and well, what we did in the study, because this is her PhD study. If you want to know more, you can click on the link. I probably will send you the PowerPoint later. But what she did was to make audio recordings of the one-on-one conversations that caregivers had with the young people, and we made state spaces of this. It's from the dynamic system theory. So what we did was the caregivers, they could do different actions like ME, inherent behavior, like ME, motivational interviewing skills. They give information during the conversation they had. They could give a reflection, like a short summary of what the young people person said. They could ask questions, or they could show motivation non-adherent behavior, like using confrontations or giving advice without permission to the young person, like this writing reflex action, corrective actions actually, which is adherent to motivational interviewing. And we also looked at adolescent on the other side, like the reaction of the adolescent to the action of the care workers. And we looked at change talk, which is out with our it's about the talk of the young person about maybe you want to achieve change or going towards change you want to achieve. We have ambivalence, like change talk and sustained talk. Sustained talk is more like resistance or the things that young people say that they don't want to do or they don't want to change, for example. And you have follow neutral. So what we did we had these recordings and we made a whole transcript of the whole conversation and we put it in this state space grid. So for example, if the care workers started with a question, then in this case, the young person replied with ambivalence. And then the care worker goes on with ME adherent behavior. And then you have talk as a response. And then the care workers might reflection. And then the young person will reply with the sustained talk. And then we have like ME behavior again from the care worker and ambivalence as a response. So it's very general now. I could say more about this, but I don't have time. But now you have an idea how we make these observations. And what Annemiek in Huistra did in her study is we compared these conversations before and after the training. They had a motivational interviewing training of 3 days. And what we saw in her study, for example, was that the care workers did use a bit ME adherent behavior, for example, before the training, You see that here, some actions of them, different effects actually on the young persons, different responses. And after the training, we saw significant more motivational interviewing adherent behavior of the professionals in her study. So we saw that there was a significant improvement in this motivational interviewing skills after 3 days training, but almost none of the care workers, which were 13, so we did not have a very large group, but there were 13 care workers. We looked at on a very micro level, and we saw that they were improving that, but not on a sufficient level, like what you want to see as you're looking at motivational interviewing. So having this said, it's very important to look at good therapeutic relationships, positive treatment skills, and training can lead to or associate with better skills, which eventually you would also like to see to lead better outcomes. But well, there is some work to be done, I think, on that field. And to conclude, what we also see in the Netherlands, because the study of Annemiek Harder was focusing on trying to improve secure residential care practices, you also see in the Netherlands developing alternatives for secure residential care, like closing secure residential care facilities and developing small-scale residential groups. So this is the final slide about this, but it fits in very well about the knowledge we have about good therapeutic relationships. Because if you are developing small-scale residential groups, you have more time and more opportunity for individual attention and real contact with young people. Now, we know that it's important to have good therapeutic relationships and know about interests of young people and motivations of them. You need less rules. You don't have to apply uniform rules and keep youth in line. This is a smaller risk for repression if you have a smaller group. And smaller group, I mean, in the Netherlands, we need 4 to 6 young people group, which was like 8 to 10 before in a secure residential facility. So it's quite a big change, I think. And it also gives an opportunity to provide a safe living environment, peace and continuity, less work pressure, stress and higher job satisfaction, and less incidents. So these are some findings we had from a recent study on these small-scale facilities as an alternative for secure residential use in the Netherlands. And there still is research going on this field, but the first results show that it's quite promising to work with smaller groups, to have attention for the motivations of young people, and to have more room for building good therapeutic relationships. So I think that's a promising development in the Netherlands, but we still need to do more research on this. But then you have a bit of an idea what is going on and in the Netherlands we're going to. So on the one hand, focusing on improving secure residential care, and on the other also trying to develop alternatives for secure residential care, like these small-scale facilities. So I hope you have an idea now what's going on in the Netherlands. You probably might have questions, so I'll hear them.
Perfect, and almost exactly on time, so thank you for that as well. Thank you so much for that. There's so much, many interesting things in what you just said. I mean, it's quite heavy on data, so we all need a bit of time maybe. I don't think we have a little bit of time now for a few questions. I don't think you can post, if any of the participants have a reflection or a question, you can post in the Q&A box at the bottom. I think one reflection from me would be, well, one difference from us will be that separation in the juvenile justice system, where we still place children in the same institutions, or we're moving towards more separation of target group. It's the same, it's the national board are responsible for that group as well, and that's kind of intrinsic challenge here. But I think maybe you can just say something about this policy and those commissions experience that kind of led to this policy decision to move away from larger in the institutions, the larger groups, and alternatives to secure residential care, including the ambition to reduce the use of force and repression, because it's challenging, right? So I mean, maybe you can say just how it's going so far. I mean, you've been working towards that for a few years at least.
Yeah. Well, in a couple of last years, but the main idea behind this to develop these alternatives and small-scale facilities is, of course, to prevent repression happen, and also to be better able to give them young people a better environment to grow up in. The whole idea, of course, is that these larger or secure residential settings are actually doing more harm than they are doing good. So that's the whole idea behind this. And well, what still is the challenge, of course, is that, of course, it costs. It's secure residential care costly, but if you have small scale facilities, they're also costly. And of course, Dutch people, not me specifically, but policymakers are very on costs. So they want to reduce as much as possible. So now foster families and family treatment homes are much cheaper actually than, for example, small scale facilities. Still, the priority is a lot on foster care and how we can use that. But there's still some young people in the Netherlands that are too difficult. They're too difficult to handle by foster families. So they need to, it is quite clear now that we really need to also develop alternatives like small scale facilities. And but the challenge will be to have enough finance for this also in the longer term. So, for example, we now have like budget for facilities to actually build, to rebuild their buildings, to make it smaller. So now there will be some money for facilities or youth care agencies to do that. But then you still need, in long term, you still need a different organization, and you probably need, well, also more finance to have more care workers on less young people. So that's the challenge I think we still are facing in the Netherlands.
But that transition or change will also include a physical change of the infrastructure and the buildings and so on. Like you showed the big one, the old one that was closed apparently. But I mean, those types of places, kind of you're working to close and then to decentralize, you could say.
Yes. So that's the challenge, to have well, that's the first step, of course, to rebuild the buildings actually, and then you also need the personnel, so you need the care workers to do the work, which is also quite a difficult thing in the Netherlands at the moment, because we have a shortage of care workers, and a lot of care workers are going, well, they say goodbye to youth care because it's quite sometimes a difficult environment to work in. That will be the challenge, also to keep the good care workers for these difficult young people.
Okay. It seems like a lot in common to work with, and in an ideal world, institutional care would not exist, but we will have to continue to be there for a small group of young people. And I see that we have a lot in common also in the motivational interviewing area. That's what we train staff in 4 days. Everyone should attend to that training. And we see that it's like the way to connect young people, and that's the foundation of all treatments. Except from going to like educate the staff members, do you have any organizational helpful things to provide the staff to keep on track at a good way and not use the passive tools?
Yeah, well, a lot of organizations have their own academies, like the sort of training programs or training, groups for care workers. And of course, we also have like behavioral scientists or psychologists who are supporting care workers, but still, well, it's depending also on the youth care agency or the setting where you're working at. So we don't have very structural way of doing, I think. Might be
it's interesting this also with training and how this also affects treatment and operation, right? And you talked about also the intuitive aspects of repression in a way, also speaking to training of staff, right? But can you say something really short, because now we're moving on, but something about the kind of the level of qualifications, or the kind of how in the Dutch system, like the requirements for staff in a way?
Yes, well, they do need to have a professional education. So, and they want to have this on a higher education level. I'm not sure whether it's the same in Sweden or how you pronounce translate it into English. But there are some, and they also need to have qualifications after they're already after they started working. They still need to do training each year to keep up their professional skills, but of course it depends on what you're focused on. You can do different types of course then. So yeah, they do have professional education. And with regard to this, I actually I'm going to write, or I am writing a chapter for a book that will be published by Oxford University Press with this group, International Working Group on Residential Care. And we describe in each country how this professional skills are, or how this education looks like. So that might also be interesting. I'm not sure if Sweden is in that book. I think so, but well.
Okay, well, let's hope, because that would be interesting to compare.
Yeah.
All right, well, we can have, I think, maybe 100 more questions or so, but we'll have to leave you for a bit now. Maybe there's time at the end to come back to you also. Thank you again. Sarah.
Yes, yes, thank you, Annemiek. Very interesting. I hope we could continue to work together in the close future. But now I would like to introduce Sander Konings and Peter van der Sande, two experienced clinicians that will take us from research to practice, and tell us more about done in the Netherlands to prevent reduced isolation of force. And now you will be telling us about the practice of schema-based interventions. Very interesting. So, please.
Let me share my PowerPoint with you. Let's hope this works. Does everybody see this? Does this work? Okay, good. So to start off, if sounds bad, please let me know by waving. We're currently at the Dutch Schema Therapy Congress, where we'll be doing a workshop together. So we've made some time to do this, but we're in a magazine hall, so it's kind of loud. We'll be talking about schema-focused approach, and which is basically an intervention built to help care workers grow from correction to connection, where they learn that repression can be replaced with empathy, and that you can still confront this functional behavior. To introduce, my name is Sander Konings. I work for one of these secure residential care facilities that Annemiek has been talking about, and I lead the second stage of development for this schema-focused approach. And I've brought with me someone else.
Who started 10 years ago to rebuild a youth prison to treatment facility. And there was the schema-focused approach introduced and extended last years.
Yeah. So to give some insight, we used to be a prison, juvenile prison, which had a really repressive method. And when we reformed to youth care, like many of our prisons have done, our youth prisons, we had to learn to work based on relationships. And one of our first problems, we focused on the form of care. So we focused on closed residential care. So that's our expertise. But over time, we learned that not specifically the form of care, but our target group was our expertise. So high-risk youth with many multiple complex problems. And what is this schema-focused approach we're going to talk about? Well, it's actually, it's a generic milieu or climate-based intervention, which is focused on building a warm, responsive, and empathic treatment climate in your units. Like Annemiek talked about, many of the problems we encounter in compulsory care relate to repression or use of force. And to do this, we lean heavily on the principles and techniques out of schema therapy. But I must emphasize that this intervention is not a form of psychotherapy. It's really climate-based. It's really, we do schema therapy, but we train schema therapists who do the psychotherapy for it. So what we do is that we train all institutional workers in some of these mentioned principles and techniques. And I'll take you through that during the PowerPoint. There's much more information in it than I can talk about, but I'll leave the PowerPoint with you. So if any questions arise, send me an email or contact me and we can talk about it. What are the goals? And the first thing we've done when formulating goals for this method is that we have two groups. We have youth in our care and we have our professionals. And it took me a long time to realize that the goals for these two groups are similar. Because one, we want to develop a common language for all these problematic patterns that our youth have. So for problematic emotions, cognitions, and behavioral futures or coping. We want to understand the development and the effect on their lives. At the same time, we want youth and professionals to strengthen their connection. And in the long run, to develop skills to deal with all these problematic patterns. And if this all succeeds, you will get a healthy living and treatment climate in your treatment units. So my next sheet, this is a lot of information. I'm not going to talk about all these blocks, but basically when you have common language, it creates understanding and connection, which gives room to build skills to deal with all these problems, and in the long term gives you a good treatment climate. What we're going to focus on is a small part of the theory, and then we're going to show how we build a common language between youth and youth care workers, so they can try to understand each other. So step one is that we train all our institutional care workers to understand that children or every child has basic emotional needs. And these consist
and every adult. And
every adult as well. So it goes two ways for them and for us. And it's about safety and connection, which we also know as attachment. It's about self-appreciation or appreciation, about real boundaries and routines. The one I'm mentioning right now is the most interesting discussions when it comes to repression. When are boundaries realistic? It goes about autonomy and a way to play or express your own needs. And if these emotional needs are met, then you see a healthy child growing up into a healthy adult, which means they have a healthy identity and personality. And we teach this as common knowledge. So every institutional worker that starts his job at our facility has a 3-day course that's completely about this principle, everything surrounding it. We also know that if things go wrong and children experience cases that deprive them of these emotional needs, they develop schemas. And multiple empirical studies have shown that schemas exist in children. These are patterns of self-defeating thoughts, emotions, and memories that basically bias their perception of the world. And these schemas also force children to cope with how they feel. But if everything goes wrong, the way they cope doesn't help. So to give you an example, the child who's always been bullied and neglected, who's been punished severely by his parents, he tries to cope by not going to school because he's scared he'll be bullied again. But by not going to school, he doesn't fit in. So he feels neglected again and again and again. And we teach our institutional workers and our youngsters that this process works this way, and that you need to be that you need to have empathy for this process. And that if you become empathic to that process, to their story, that you can build connection. So how does that work? How do we build from something that's as theoretical as that? How do we build that into a common language? Because what child wants to talk about, I've been abused and that's why I run away? None of them do, because most of them don't even recognize this. So what we've done is, in schema therapy, we have a concept called mode or sides. And this concept consists of these patterns of thoughts and emotions and the way they deal with it and the way you can see these things on the outside. And what we've done is we've visualized this. We've managed to draw images in connection to the children living in our facility and with workers that portray these states of being. So to make an example, a child that has heavy distrust and that feels completely unworthy, which is a schema that's being activated, and that decides to cope and overcompensate to prove to the world that he's actually worth something, might portray arrogance or aggression. So what I'm saying is that what you see on the outside is not what's happening on the inside with these children. And that's what, with schema-focused approach, we're trying to teach our group workers. Yes, you are dealing with aggression. Yes, you are dealing with drug abuse, with children not respecting sexual boundaries, for instance. If you peel back the layers, you'll get into these memories and emotions and cognitions that force them to act like this. So instead of responding to the outside, we want to teach you to respond to the inside. So to show how this common language works, instead of saying you're aggressive and that's bad, we teach them to say things like this. I see a side of you that's acting out and angry with me, believing that I'm about to abandon you. The schema underlying the anger is abandonment, the fear of abandonment. Or did I just meet with the side of you that protects me from having to distrust you again by acting out like you're angry? And to emphasize why this visualization is so important, the second sentence I just mentioned, it's in my sheet. You see the visualization next to it? The most interesting part is that we see that converting this theory into visualization allows children to actually point. So when I'm in my therapy room or my group workers are working with these children, the time talking is hard because there's aggression and there's problems. But when one of them asks, look, which side of you am I meeting right now and why? Most of our children in our institution, they just point. It's this. I'm deflecting you with anger. And they get into a whole conversation in which they can be empathic to each other. And at the same time, what do you think that happens to our group workers when they recognize this in the children in our institution? Well, that's interesting. They recognize these patterns with themselves because the behavior of our children makes them fearful as well. So they act out. And the base of our schema-focused approach is that they learn to reflect on that. So if this child lashes out, I lash out back. I shouldn't do that. I should help him. I should be empathic. So how to do this? Well, here's our rather large visualization of all these modes that we meet in our children. And the funny thing is, me and Petter kind of exchanged these images a little bit already. And well, here we go. All these images are states of being, sides that consist of emotions, cognitions, and behavioral code. And these children recognize every single one of them. which makes talking to each other so much easier. So I'm going to ask, well, Joel to open his mic.
Yes, hi.
And so there's this purple guy with a crown and the one. What do you think this child is doing when he points at that specific figure?
The one at the bottom there?
Yeah, the one, yeah, with the one and the crown on his head, the purple one.
Maybe, well, he's trying to send out an image of being strong and powerful, maybe?
Exactly. But at the same time, he's feels like
vulnerable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So without me explaining these images, get them. And that's why this helps us battle repression. Because it's really easy to get in a conversation like this and talk about these vulnerable sides and these angry and critical sides, or actually their healthy side. Most of these children have a healthy side that helps them cope with in a proper way, but it's usually overshadowed by all these angry and furious sides, which they are in the institution for most of the time. Well, it's a fun story, but when I say from research to practice, I want to turn it around as well. Because we did the practice and we're working on going to research again. So one of the first studies in the Netherlands on the schema-focused approach has compared 4 residential treatment units, where 2 had care as usual, as you know it in Sweden, as we know it in the Netherlands, and 2 units taught a schema-focused approach. Co-workers or institutional were trained and supervised weekly and coached on their own schemas and modes. Measured in 2 ways. They measured the group workers and the youth. With the youth, they asked about the treatment climate. How responsive are the workers? Is there room for you to grow? How's the group atmosphere? And do you feel like the care workers are repressive or not? And with the group workers, they asked about team functioning, how many incidents there were, and they followed them on how repressive they worked. Most interestingly, when it comes to using common language that was understood by both, the schema-focused approach, children and youth workers reported that they understood each other better than the care usual. At the same time, the schema-focused approach, the climate in these groups increased significantly over a year, while as the care as usual, climate decreased over time. And more interestingly, the care as usual in general had a lower treatment climate than the schema-focused approach groups. So not only did it decline in baseline, in total basis, it was lower as well. They didn't go above the requirements of the schema-focused groups. And when it comes to repression, that subject we're talking about consistently, it shows that the units that have group workers trained in this focused approach show a significant larger decrease in the use of repressive staff interventions compared to the care as usual interventions. They haven't gone to the mechanism yet, how this works, but the hypothesis is that empathy, alliance, and care are the things that make them less repressive because they understand how these children work and they don't want to damage them further. Team functioning was consistently reported better in the schema-focused groups by the workers themselves compared to the care as usual units. So not only did the children benefit from the schema-focused approach, so did the functioning of our employees.
Just for a small time frame.
I'm done. I'm kind of done.
Sorry. Then.
So yeah, this was actually the final part. We went from practice. One small part of practice was the visualization of modes into what did we benefit research-wise. And this is the first step with many to come, but we believe that this will help us battle rejection.
Well, thank you. It's been very interesting to listen to you. And like the core of treatment, alliance, relationship, care, empathy, but we all know that that's important. But I think human therapy might be a useful tool how to do it, how to train people that are not like advanced in treatment schooling, how to do it in a way. So this would be very interesting to follow up on. Thank you very much. I have some minutes left, and I would like to introduce Petter Marklund from the National Board to make a reflection from the National Board perspective and maybe present something about our work with this group.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's an obvious thing that you're always going to say, oh, it's been a very interesting presentation, but it really has been extremely interesting presentations, and I have a great many reflections actually. But I think that, well, first of all, I think that my idea was to sort of touch on a few key aspects of residential care and find some common ground and some common challenges, and maybe say a few words on how we're dealing with that at the moment in our agency. And the first most obvious one is the topic for this seminar: how to minimize and get rid of repressive methods, the use of isolation, the use of force, the use of sort of repressive methods and attitudes among staff, and come to terms with all ideas about residential care being a sort of corrective institutions. So I think that seems to be a challenge that we share in a lot of countries all over the world, not just in the Netherlands and Sweden, but well, in other parts as well. And we had a really interesting discussion when we talked the other day, Sander and Peter and I, about one of the ways we try to go about this is, and I think you've all touched on the subject already, is sort of how do we help people? How do we help ourselves? How do we help staff to take a look beyond the displayed behavior of the children we're working with? To try and make sense of what we're seeing, because as Annemiek touched on, I think it was Swampel that had said something about it's quite difficult to be empathic, to build a stable relationship with someone that's treating you poorly, that's displaying aggressive behavior, that are throwing things at you and calling you names. And how do we reach that? How do we create that sort of sense of being able to look at the displayed behavior? And we do that in many ways. One of the ways that we try to do that is by implementing Howard Ball's idea about trauma-wise care in our unit. And I mean, trauma isn't everything, but it's one framework of thinking about why are we seeing these behaviors and youth that we are treating. And it's a quite useful way, and it's also a way of thinking, I believe, that is really good at eliciting empathy in care workers. When they get a more fundamental understanding of how trauma works and what sort of behaviors it can result in, that's very helpful to be able to look beyond behavior. But I also think that this also of course touches on a third key aspect that I think we all share, that the knowledge that stable, secure treatment relationships or treatment alliances it's paramount to being able to help these young people. But I was really interested when you spoke earlier, Annemiek, on the how. I mean, it's really easy to say that. Oh, it's important with stable relationships. Yeah, but how do you create it? And the way you tied it into actual skills and you tied it into motivational interviewing. That'd be, well, both happy because I think we're on the same page. We're doing that as well. We have the same core idea, but also a little bit disappointed because I was hoping for that magic key and that you would present something radical and new that we could just steal from you and use to improve our facilities. But another aspect of this is you touched on several things, Annemiek, about creating smaller care units, and that we've seen that there's a sort of an inherent difficulty when you have these large groups of young people, and that's we finding exactly the same thing. And I'm heading a project, well, not heading, but I'm managing a project within the agency that is directed at the young people that are displaying the absolutely most problematic behaviors, where staff really have a really hard time to handle these children, and where it's very easy for staff to fall into sort of oppressive patterns or repeatedly using a sort of force to control their behavior. And what we found in this small subgroup of young people is that we often see the same things. We see autism, we see intellectual disability, we see trauma, we see comorbidity with other psychiatric diagnoses, etc. And one of the key aspects in that work has been to, well, one thing, educate staff on, okay, these disabilities, what are these disabilities, how they work, and how does that translate into the behavior that we see today? But also very sort of basic things like, okay, but we can't have 8 people with these problems living together. That's a recipe for disaster. We have to scale down. We have to, you mentioned 4 to 6, we cap at 4 because we see we can't manage much more than that. And these young people can't really manage it either. So I think there are a lot of similarities. There are a lot of challenges that we share. One thing I would like to, if either one of you want to reflect on it, is, I mean, there's also the constant sort of balance between the empathic relation building therapeutic approach and safety and security concepts, because we are dealing with the people that has extremely sometimes extremely violent behaviors. And how do you work to sort of combine those two aspects? I mean, that's $1 million question in ways for institutional care, but I'm really interested to hear if you have some reflections on that.
I kind of do. When it comes to the schema-focused approach, we work with, there's a concept of chemotherapy that we call limit setting and empathic confrontation. And it's where you try to grasp the best of both worlds, where you at first glance try to be empathic for why does this happen? So you feel neglected by me as a care worker, or you think I will abandon you and that's why you're so aggressive, or try to harm yourself in the hope that I stay. But at the same time, they need to learn that whilst being empathic for that, they need to set boundaries for the coping mechanism that comes after. And this is the hardest thing we have to teach in this schema approach, because me and Peter spend about a day full of role play and trying to get them to do both. Because if you get hurt by what they're telling you, or it gets much harder, but you need to keep doing both. There's no middle, if you only go into confronting this dysfunctional behavior, you'll go back to repression on the long term. And at the same time, if you only do empathy, it becomes unsafe because you teach these children that this behavior is right, and in no formal way it is. It's understandable, but it's not right to try to hurt somebody. And that's the hardest balance, I think, for compulsory care. And there's no real answer than to keep talking about it, and to keep training, and to keep trying, and trial and error.
But if youngsters understood, a lot of the aggression is already gone.
we see examples of girls aged 13, 14 who've been heavily into prostitution, who are completely suicidal when they arrive in our institution. And if things start with empathy, much of the suicidal tendencies drift away in the first weeks. They land, they relax, and they talk. And sometimes as a therapist, it takes me 6 months to even do a normal intervention, to try to do some imagery rescripting or whatever. But just 6 months of understanding, and yeah, this is bad. The fact that you got here is bad, and the fact that your parents neglected you is horrible. They calm down. So empathy comes first when you ask me.
Yeah, and in addition to that, Annika Eenstra also looked at other group care workers, for example, showed reflections during these conversations, and you see that care workers use a lot of questions actually during their contact with young people. About 50% of their actions were questions, and you see about 16% of their actions were actual reflections on what the young people said or did. So there is a huge we can still achieve a lot more there in empathy, and also a difference between empathy and sympathy, because you often see sympathy with the care workers, like, oh, it's very difficult for you, or it's very hard, or well, standing beside. But if you show empathy, you really try to stand in their feet and try to imagine how it is to be in their shoes. And of course, you cannot always do that, but you can at least reflect on what they are saying, or might be signaling, like not saying, but like what you think you are seeing with them, or what's behind their behavior. And that is, I think, the key, that you indeed use these reflections to show empathy. And a lot of professionals say, okay, yes, I am being empathetic, but in practice, they are not always, and they are not using these reflections. So I think we should really train them more in showing reflections.
Thank you so much, all. We're 1 minute overtime even, but we could have gone on for a lot more. I think this last bit of discussion, not least, is super interesting and relevant for the Swedish discussion. I mean, here is sometimes also expressed how repression and how the use of certain repressive methods are actually needed to deal with this target group. And you know, there's that balance, of course, talk about with security as well, but I think there's some really important learnings for all of us when we try to design a system that actually treat and care for this group of children in the best way. And I think your point there, Peter, about when children are met with empathy, a lot of the aggression actually goes away. So it's not necessarily it's easy, of course, but I think that's an important point. So thank you so much for participating today and for sharing all of these insights from the Netherlands. Let's hope it's a start for more cooperation and contact. I think we can all learn from each other a lot. Our systems are of course different, but there are, like you said, Petter, as well, there's lots of similarities as well. And I mean, from our side at Childhood Foundation, we work with this internationally as well, and it's very clear that you can organize, you can train staff, you can deal with this in many different ways. So it's not, there's not one magic solution, but it's also you can manage and construct this in different ways. So we need to continue learning. I think if we put the PowerPoint up now, I think maybe the participants have this anyway, but if maybe more reflections and questions, you can reach out to me or Sarah. We can forward the contacts to Annemiek and Sander and Peter as well to take this forward since we didn't have that much time for questions. So thank you all, and we'll wrap up here. All the best and have a good rest of your Friday afternoon.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.